Hello everyone. Before we start, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you. That's how YouTube keeps sending you stories like this. And now, let's get into it. I answered the ad on a hot Monday evening in July 2019, the kind of heat that sits on your skin even after the sun starts dropping. I had been looking for a cheap set of shelves and a small table for my spare room, and the listing on Craigslist seemed perfect. The photos were a bit blurry, but the price was low, and the seller wrote that he needed everything gone that same day. I had the day off and figured it was worth the short drive to East Mesa. I pulled into the storage facility at around 6:20 p.m. The place was quiet in a way that felt heavier than usual. Long rows of beige metal doors sat in straight lines, the light fading behind the roofs and making the aisles feel narrow. Most people had already packed up and gone. I saw one guy loading a truck near the entrance, but he drove off before I even turned my engine off. The man from the ad was already waiting. I recognized him from his tiny profile picture. Mid-40s, short hair, sweaty even though he wasn't doing anything, and moving his hands a lot like he couldn't keep them still. He didn't smile, but he looked at me with this impatient energy, tapping the ground with the toe of his shoe like he had been standing there forever. He pointed toward the back of the property and said it was all kept, just back there. He didn't slow down enough for me to see any unit numbers, and the air inside the aisles felt thick and stale as we walked deeper in. The sun kept sinking and the long shadows made the rows feel like empty hallways that went on too far. We walked for about 2 minutes, maybe a bit more, but it was enough for me to notice that none of the unit numbers we passed matched the one he wrote in the ad. His unit number had been in the 300s. We walked past the 500s, then the 600s, like he didn't care where he was going. He just kept moving deeper into the property, almost like he wanted us as far from the main gate as possible. I slowed down a little and felt something stiffen in my chest. The whole time, he didn't point at a single door. He didn't look at any locks. He didn't carry any key. There was no sign of furniture in sight. It was just row after row of closed doors, and the sound of the metal roofs cooling in the evening air. I told him I needed to grab a dolly from my trunk. I said it casually, trying not to show anything on my face, but inside my stomach was twisting because I could feel something wrong, something I didn't want to name yet. His shoulders tensed like I had thrown cold water on him. His hands twitched even more. I didn't wait for whatever look he gave me after that. I turned and walked back the way we came. I kept my pace fast but steady. I didn't run. Running felt like it would make things worse. The whole place was almost silent except for my footsteps and the hum of distant traffic on the main road. The sun had dropped low enough that the aisles were now half dark, and the numbers on the units got harder to read as I moved. The heat clung to my shirt and made the air feel thick in my throat. After maybe 10 seconds, I heard footsteps behind me. Sharp, quick, heavier than mine. The kind of pace someone uses when they don't want to run, but want to catch up fast. The sound bounced around the metal doors, and I couldn't tell how close he really was. I didn't turn around. I kept moving toward the wider main aisle where the light was better, and where my car sat near the front gate. My heart felt like it was stuck in my neck. When I reached the open aisle, I finally let myself speed up. I unlocked my car with the remote, yanked the door open, and slid inside just as he came around the corner. He wasn't carrying anything. No furniture, no dolly, no box. Just empty hands. And he didn't look tired from walking. He looked annoyed, like I had skipped some part of his plan he thought I was supposed to follow without asking. He slapped the window once with the flat of his hand. Not hard enough to break it. Not even hard enough to sound angry, just a single smack that felt more like impatience than rage. I didn't look at him long. I locked the doors, put the car in reverse, and backed out so fast my tires scraped the curb. I didn't breathe right until I got past the front gate and onto the road. When I got home, the whole thing circled in my head over and over. The wrong unit numbers, the empty easels, his strange pace, the way he followed without calling my name or trying to explain anything. There hadn't been a single piece of furniture anywhere. No shelves. No table. Nothing that matched the pictures he posted. The next morning, the ad was gone. Not expired, gone. No trace of it, no cached photos, no reposts. It was like it had been put up only for that one window of time, like he never planned to keep it online for more than a few hours. I told myself maybe it meant nothing. Maybe he sold the stuff and deleted it. But the pictures had looked like they were taken in a living room, not a storage unit. That detail bothered me more than anything else. That evening, I drove past the facility again. Part of me wanted to prove I had overreacted. Part of me wanted to see if it really felt as strange as it had the night before. I didn't pull into the lot. I just slowed down as I passed the front gate. His truck was there. Same dark-colored pickup, same dent on the tailgate, parked at an angle like he wanted to watch the road. He wasn't out of the truck this time. There was no new ad posted. No reason for him to be waiting for anyone. The sun was dropping again, just like the night before, and the inside of the facility looked just as empty. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down any more than I already had. I kept driving until I was out of sight of the place, and I didn't take Craigslist pickup offers from anyone after that, unless I could meet them in crowded areas with cameras and open parking lots. I never reported it because I didn't have anything concrete, nothing illegal, nothing I could describe without sounding dramatic or unsure. All I had was the memory of walking deeper into a place that felt like a trap the longer I stayed in it. All I had was the sight of him standing behind my car with empty hands and a flat stare, like he had been waiting for me to do something different, something slower, something that would give him more time. For months after, whenever I drove through East Mesa around sunset, I felt my chest tighten. The heat, the long shadows, the empty rows of storage units on the side of the road. They all reminded me of that slow walk into the back of that place, and the thought of how easily something worse could have happened if I had hesitated even a little longer. Nothing supernatural ever happened. No mystery figures, no strange symbols, no weird stories in the news. Just a man who set up a fake ad, told me to follow him into a dead, silent maze of storage units, and didn't want me to leave once I realized something was wrong. That was enough. When I first moved to Sacramento in 2017, I was desperate in a way that made my judgment slip. I had maybe $300 left after paying deposits on my job transfer, and I was living out of a cheap motel off Fulton Avenue. Every day that passed felt like I was losing time, losing money, losing options. That's why the Craigslist ad caught my eye. A room near Arden Arcade for $350 a month, utilities included. No deposit, month to month. It looked too good. T-point, but I wasn't in a place where I could afford to be cautious. I kept refreshing the page like it might vanish if I didn't grab it fast enough. The guy answered my message 10 minutes after I sent it. His emails were short and strange, like someone trying hard to sound normal but missing the mark. He said he only liked to meet potential roommates after dark because it helped him see how people vibe when the day is over. The wording made me uneasy, but the price pulled me back. I told myself people phrase things badly all the time. Maybe he worked nights. Maybe he was shy. I tried to justify it in any way I could because the alternative was packing up and driving back to my old apartment in shame. We agreed to meet at 9:45 p.m. on a Wednesday. I remember the exact time because I kept checking my phone over and over while driving there, trying to get my nerves under control. The neighborhood looked normal when I pulled in. Quiet streets, regular houses, nothing special. The porch lights were mostly off, but that's normal for late at night. The house I needed was near the corner. Worn from the outside, it actually looked pretty well kept. The grass was trimmed, and the windows were lit, It didn't look like the kind of place where anything bad would happen. I parked across the street for a second just to watch the house, mostly to calm myself down. I didn't see any movement inside. No shadows walking past the windows, no shapes in the doorway. I forced myself to get out of the car and walk over. The air was cold enough that my breath fogged, and the smell of wet pavement hung in the air from a light drizzle earlier that night. When I knocked, the door opened almost immediately, like he had been standing right behind it waiting. I didn't hear any footsteps before it swung open. That hit me harder than it should have. Something about someone waiting like that felt wrong. But he didn't say anything, didn't do anything odd. He just stepped aside and let me in. The first thing I noticed inside was how empty it felt. Not just visually empty, but emotionally empty. The living room had absolutely nothing in it. No couch, no chairs, no shelves. No decorations, nothing at all. The walls looked freshly painted, but the paint job was sloppy. Some spots were thin, some were thicker. Mold and streaks ran down in places like someone tried to cover something up in a hurry. Even the baseboards had uneven patches, as if whatever was there before had been ripped out. The smell was strange too. Not dirty, not moldy, not chemical, just blank. Like drywall dust and plain air. It made the place feel even colder than it was outside. He walked ahead without saying a word and pointed me down the hall. I followed because I didn't know what else to do. The hall was narrow and quiet. No pictures, no shoe rack, no signs that anyone lived there at all. The only sound came from our footsteps on the thin carpet. The room he showed me was just a square space with a single mattress on the floor and a small folding table beside it. Nothing else. No closet door. Just an open space where a rod hung crookedly with no hangers. The window had blinds, but they were bent. The carpet looked newer in that room, like it had been cleaned right before I arrived, but not enough to hide faint circular marks from something heavy that used to sit in there. Then I saw the padlock mounted on the outside of the door frame. Not a lock on the door. A latch and a padlock on the outer frame, the kind someone else would use to lock a door from the outside. It caught my attention immediately. It didn't make sense in a normal house. It wasn't there for privacy. That kind of lock was meant to keep someone in. I didn't touch it, but my eyes kept going back to it. I felt something in my chest tighten. That sinking realization where your body knows something before your brain admits it. I followed him back toward the living room. And that's when I noticed the indentations on the carpet. The entire room may have been empty now, but the carpet showed long impressions, shapes of large furniture pressed deeply into it, running along the walls, a couch, a long table, a chair near one corner. It was like the room had been full an hour earlier and cleared out fast. Like someone knew I was coming and didn't want me to see whatever used to be there. My skin crawled when I realized how fresh those indentations looked. They hadn't had time to rise. Whatever furniture had been there had been removed recently, maybe earlier that day. The quiet inside the house was so intense it felt like pressure. No hum of a fridge, no sound from another room, no soft noise of electronics or plumbing. It felt like the house was in a pause, like everything had been emptied just for this meeting. He stood near the door, waiting. His face didn't show anything angry or cheerful or nervous. It was almost blank, flat, like he was running on autopilot. I tried not to make eye contact, but I could feel him watching me even when I looked away. I told him I needed to get something from my car before deciding. I said it calmly even though my heart was pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. I didn't break into a run until the front door was fully closed behind me. The moment that latch clicked, I bolted across the yard and sprinted to my car so fast I nearly slipped on the wet pavement. When I locked my doors, my hands were shaking so badly I missed the ignition twice. I didn't look back at the house. I just drove away, taking random turns until I was sure he couldn't follow me. The next morning, I woke up to 2 emails from him. The first one said I had ruined the appointment. The second asked if I planned to behave properly and set a new time. Reading those messages made my stomach twist. It felt like he was trying to scold me, like he thought I owed him something. I reported the listing, thinking nothing would happen. Craigslist never feels fast about anything. But the ad vanished within an hour. Deleted completely. I checked for it again that evening, scrolling through every rental listing in the area. Nothing. It was like it had never existed. The house didn't appear again under any other listing. The user account that posted it went dark. I still think about that padlock on the outside of the door. The empty house. The marks in the carpet from furniture that had been rushed out of sight. The way he opened the door like he'd been waiting right there for me. I moved into a cramped studio a week later, paying far more than I could afford, but I never let myself complain about it again. Every night when I locked my door, I remembered how close I came to stepping into a room someone else could have locked from the outside. And no matter how many years go by, I can't shake the feeling that the man didn't take down the listing because he was scared of getting reported. He took it down because he wasn't done clearing the house, and he didn't want the next person showing up too early. I drove out that night because the roads were empty, and I didn't want to deal with the usual Orlando traffic. It was early April 2020, that strange quiet period when everything felt half shut and half awake. The Craigslist ad said the couch was free, curbside, pickup only, first come first serve. The photos looked like a simple beige two-seater in decent condition. I didn't even need it that badly, but something about getting something useful for free felt good at a time when the whole world was tense and strange. The address was near Conway Road, in one of those older rental neighborhoods where every house looks like it belongs to a different decade. I got there around 8:30 p.m. The sun was gone, and in the street was that muted mix of warm porch lights and dark driveways. Their house was easy to spot because the ad mentioned a chipped mailbox and a cracked driveway. I pulled up in front, stepped out, and right away I could tell something was off. There was no couch. Not even an outline of where one might have been dragged or pushed. No marks on the curb, no debris, nothing. The lawn looked untouched. The house itself had one dim yellow light on inside, but the blinds were shut tight, not even tilted open. The yard was still, the air heavy and warm. That typical Florida humidity where even at night you can feel the heat sticking to your skin. I walked up the sidewalk a bit just to check if I missed it. Maybe someone had already taken it. Maybe the owners moved it back inside. I tried not to think too hard about it, because the whole thing already felt strange, but I told myself it was just a free couch, not a big deal. I turned back toward my truck, and that was when I noticed movement in the window. It was subtle, just a shift, a very slow change of shape behind the blinds. I stared for a second, waiting to see if it was a trick from the light. But it wasn't. Someone was standing inside, still enough that the blinds barely moved, but the shadow was shaped like a person. The height, the way it held still, the slight tilt of the head. I could feel that prickling sensation in my back, like being watched directly. I didn't want to make it obvious that I had seen them, so I pretended to check my phone. I scrolled down the Craigslist post again. Same address. Same picture of the couch. Same instructions. Nothing about a different pickup time. Nothing saying someone else had claimed it. The whole thing suddenly felt wrong, like I had stepped into something I wasn't supposed to. As I was still looking at my phone, I heard the sound of footsteps on concrete. Slow, deliberate. I looked up, and two men stepped out from the side of the house, from the narrow shadow between the wall and the wooden fence. Both were wearing dark hoodies, pulled over their heads, even though it was warm enough to sweat through a shirt. They pretended to be checking their phones, heads down, but their bodies angled toward me. They weren't walking down the sidewalk. They were walking toward my truck, toward me. At first I tried to convince myself they were just neighbors. Maybe they lived there. Maybe they were just coming outside at a weird moment. But the way they moved didn't feel casual. They didn't talk. They didn't look anywhere else. They just slowly reduced the distance between us while pretending they had something else to do. I started walking faster toward my truck, careful not to break into a run. The whole time I could feel the person behind the blinds still watching. I didn't have to see them to know they hadn't moved. The house felt too quiet, too controlled, like everything was planned around the moment I showed up. I got to my truck and pulled the door open. One of the men changed direction immediately. He walked straight up to the passenger window, as if he had every right to be there. I locked the doors before he got close, and the clicking sound echoed inside the truck louder than normal. He didn't knock. He didn't tap the window. He just leaned down and put his hands around his eyes to block the glare, peering in like he was trying to figure out exactly who I was. But his face was half hidden in the hood, but I could see the bottom half of it. Jaw tight, mouth pressed flat, no sign he was pretending to be friendly. The other guy stayed a few feet back. He standing in the beam of my headlights. He still looked down at his phone but wasn't typing, wasn't scrolling, wasn't doing anything. Just holding it and waiting. My hands were shaking as I put the truck in reverse. I wasn't thinking clearly. I just knew I had to get out. I backed up so fast the tires hopped the curb, and the whole truck jolted hard enough that the guy at the window stepped back. I didn't look at them again. I didn't even care if someone saw me driving like an idiot. I just kept reversing until I had enough room to straighten out and get away. When I got 2 blocks down, I finally checked my mirrors. No one was behind me. No one running after the truck. The street looked normal again, like nothing had happened at all. I pulled into an empty parking lot behind a closed shop. My hands were still shaking. I checked the ad again. It was still there. Same address, same couch, no edits. It felt intentional, like it was meant to lure people in. A free couch on the curb during a time when people were desperate for anything useful. No need to knock. No need for contact. Just show up at night, see a cheap piece of furniture sitting outside, grab it, load it, go. Only there was no couch. Not then, probably never. I flagged the post and wrote that it seemed suspicious. I didn't add details. I didn't want to leave anything traceable. After that I drove straight home, took the long route, checking my mirrors every few minutes. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that still figure behind the blinds. That slow movement. That controlled watching. In the morning I checked the link again. It had been removed. Not sold. Not taken down by the owner. Just gone. I don't know what those men wanted. I don't know why someone was standing in the dark house watching me. I don't know if they were waiting for someone smaller, someone slower, than someone who willingly walked closer to the house to knock on the door, thinking they just needed to ask about the couch. All I know is that the ad was bait, and I showed up for it. And if I had hesitated for even 10 more seconds, I don't think I would have driven away from that street at all. I was a broke college student in Denver in 2016, always checking the cheap sections of Craigslist to see if there was anything I could grab to make it through another week. Most of the time it was random stuff like moving help, cleaning, people wanting someone to hold a sign on a corner for a few hours. Nothing steady, nothing comfortable. But it kept gas in my car and cheap food in my fridge. I never liked the gigs section much because that was where the weird stuff usually was. But one night I was sitting in my small room, now staring at my bank balance, trying to figure out how to stretch $20 until the next Friday. My roommate was out. The apartment felt too quiet. I opened Craigslist again out of habit. The ad was simple. The guy said he needed someone to model for rope tying practice. He wrote that he was taking rock climbing courses and needed to learn knots and anchoring on a real person to understand how it translated from diagrams. He offered $60 cash for 30 minutes. That number caught me fast. $60 for half an hour would fill my tank, buy groceries, and give me some breathing room. I didn't think much of the oddness of it because I had done a bunch of strange little jobs before. People asked for weird things all the time on Craigslist. Usually the worst thing that happened was you wasted your time. I answered the ad. He replied quickly, gave me an address behind a set of mechanic shops off Federal Belvede. I knew the area, and it wasn't great, but it wasn't one of those places where you automatically felt like something terrible would happen. Just old industrial buildings, auto shops, storage units, random small businesses. He told me he'd be there around 6. I figured it would still be light out enough that it would feel safe. I told myself it was fine. I needed the money. That whole day I felt this nervous energy in my stomach. The kind you get when you're doing something unfamiliar and hoping it will go smoothly. I kept telling myself it was just rope, tying practice. People take climbing courses all the time. Knots are part of it. Maybe he lived alone and didn't have friends willing to sit still for him. I tried to make it logical in my head, because the more I thought about it, the stranger it felt. But the money was too important. I pushed away every uneasy thought and told myself it would be over fast. Around 5:30 p.m., I got in my car and drove toward Federal. The sun was still up, but that late afternoon light made everything look a little tired and washed out. The traffic was thick near the bigger roads, but once I turned into the smaller industrial area, it got quiet. The buildings looked like they always do around there: plain metal siding, old windows, faded signs, gravel lots with oil spots everywhere. And I could smell that mix of dust and engine coolant you only get around mechanic shops. The address he gave me led to a row of small warehouse units behind a strip of garages. They were the kind of places people used for woodworking or small storage businesses, single roll, up doors, nothing fancy. When I pulled up, the front door of his unit was open. Yellow light spilled out from inside. That made me feel a little better, like at least he wasn't skulking in the dark or anything. I parked along the side, locked my car, and walked up to the open doorway. Right away I noticed the air inside felt warmer than outside, like the lights had been on for a while. The floor was bare concrete with some dark stains here and there. The smell inside was strange, dusty, a little musty, like someone had opened the place after not using it for months. I expected to see climbing ropes hanging from hooks or maybe harnesses on a table. Instead, the space was almost empty except for random clutter pushed against the walls. There were 3 long coils of rope on the floor, but they were not climbing ropes, not even close. These were thick boating ropes. Heavy, rough, a pale color with darker fibers twisted into them. They were arranged too neatly, like he wanted them to be the first thing I noticed. And then almost directly across from the door, there was a tripod. A regular camera tripod, extended to about chest height, pointed toward the only cleared area on the concrete. There wasn't a camera attached to it, just the metal mount sitting there. For a second I convinced myself maybe he filmed his own progress and had moved the camera. But something felt wrong in a way that I couldn't shake. My legs felt a little stiff, and I had the urge to turn around and walk right back out. But I also felt trapped by the need for that $60. I stepped farther inside because I didn't want to look like I was panicking for no reason. The middle of the room had a blanket spread out on the ground, like he'd planned where he wanted me to sit. It wasn't a camping blanket or something meant for rough use. It looked like a regular household blanket, patterned with some faded design, almost like something taken from a bedroom. I didn't like the way it was laid out so perfectly, flat and centered. It made the room feel staged. While my first instinct was to ask about the climbing gear, because nothing in the room looked like climbing practice. None of the ropes were dynamic climbing ropes, and there were no carabiners, no harness, no belay devices, nothing. Just boating rope, a tripod, and a blanket. My stomach dropped when he moved toward a tool cabinet in the back corner. It was one of those metal cabinets you see in garages, tall with a door that sometimes squeaks. He reached behind it like he had something hidden. When he pulled his arm back into view, he wasn't holding rope. He was holding a full roll of duct tape, thick silver, brand new. The moment I saw that roll in his hand, Something tightened inside me in a way I can't describe. My body reacted before my brain did. My skin felt like it was buzzing, and a heavy pressure hit my chest. Everything in the room suddenly made sense in the worst possible way. The boating rope, the empty tripod, the blanket, the open door to make me think it was safe. All of it. He had never been practicing for climbing. He had planned something else entirely. The duct tape in his hand looked heavier than it should have. I could imagine how it would sound if it was torn off fast. I pictured myself on that blanket, unable to move. My body felt cold and hot at the same time. My mind kept saying move while the rest of me felt frozen. I didn't even think about the $60 anymore. It was like a switch flipped inside me. And all I wanted was to get out of that warehouse before the situation changed from strange to dangerous. I stepped backward first, slow, like I didn't want him to know how scared I was. But as soon as I reached the doorway, my body took over. I turned and ran. The gravel outside felt loose under my shoes. I could hear my heartbeat louder than anything else. I didn't know if he was following me. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see him standing in the doorway or hear his footsteps. I just kept running toward the main road, past the mechanic shops with their locked bays and dark windows. My lungs burned, but I kept pushing myself until I reached the gas station 2 blocks away. The bright lights of the gas station felt unreal. I stood there trying to breathe normally, trying not to look over my shoulder. It was like my brain was still stuck in that warehouse, imagining every possible thing that could have happened if I hadn't run at the exact second I did. I stayed there for several minutes, pretending to check my phone, pretending I wasn't shaking as hard as I was. When I finally walked back to my car, I unlocked it with the remote so I wouldn't have to stand still at the door. I got inside, locked it immediately, and just sat there for a moment, breathing. The warehouse was out of sight from where I parked, but I still felt like he could step out of one of the alleys at any second. I started the engine and pulled out fast, not caring if I looked suspicious. When I got home that night, I kept replaying the scene in my head. The ropes, the tripod, the empty space, the duct tape. It felt like I had stepped into the beginning of something terrible, something that would have ended in ways I didn't even want to think about. The fear stayed in my chest for hours, even after I locked my apartment door. I checked the peephole more than once. Every noise outside made me jump. Later that night my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, but I recognized it instantly. I opened the message. The text was short, and seeing it made my stomach twist again. I didn't respond. I blocked the number. But blocking a number doesn't erase the feeling of what almost happened, or how close I might have come to something I wouldn't have walked away from. For days afterward, I kept thinking about how many times I had answered Craigslist ads without worrying, how often I'd gone to strangers' houses or storage units for cheap work. I thought about how easy it is to trust the surface of something, like a clean warehouse with the door open and the lights on. I thought about how quickly a simple job offer can turn into something else when you're desperate enough to ignore the signs. I never went back to that area again. I stopped checking Craigslist for gigs, even when money got tight. Every time I drove past Federal Bluffed after that, I felt that same uneasy tightness in my ribs. Like I was passing the place where my life had almost taken a turn I wouldn't have been able to reverse. The fear stayed there, tied to that memory in a way that felt permanent. Looking back at it now, years later, I still think about how simple everything seemed when I first read that ad. Just rope tying practice. 30 minutes. $60. It sounded harmless. It sounded helpful, even. I told myself it was safe because I needed it to be safe. But the truth showed itself the moment I stepped inside that warehouse. Nothing in that room was meant for climbing. Everything in that room was meant for control, for taking advantage of someone who needed the money enough to show up alone. What scares me most is how close I came to staying. How close I came to sitting on that blanket because I didn't want to seem rude or paranoid. How easy it would have been to ignore the little things that felt off. I think about that all the time. That quiet instinct that said something was wrong saved me, even before I fully understood why. The memory still feels heavy even now, because it taught me something I didn't want to learn at that age. It taught me that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits in a neat space with clean edges, with ropes coiled in perfect lines, with a tripod pointing at an empty floor. Sometimes it hides behind a friendly tone in a short Craigslist post. And sometimes the only chance you get is the moment when fear hits fast enough to make your body move. I drove away that night with shaking hands, and I didn't slow down until I was blocks away. I didn't feel safe again until I was back in my apartment with the door locked and the lights on. Even then, the image of that duct tape stayed in my mind. It was the one detail that cut through every excuse I'd given myself. It made everything clear. It told me exactly what situation I had almost stepped into, and that was enough to make me leave. That was enough to make me run without looking back. That was enough to make the ending simple, even if the fear took years to fade. I walked out of that warehouse because I trusted the part of me that knew something was wrong. And leaving when I did was the only reason I'm able to tell the story now. I answered an ad for a summer sublet near Logan Square because I needed something cheap and simple for 3 months, nothing special, just a place to sleep and work. The listing was short and vague, and posted by a woman who said she was traveling for work. She claimed the unit was furnished, clean, and available immediately. The price was low for the area, almost too low. But I convinced myself it was because it was short-term and summer was slow. She told me she had already left the city and the keys would be with her neighbor. That should have made me pause. But I was tired of looking for places and just wanted to get it over with. When I pulled up to the building, it looked older than the photos. The brick was darker, worn down by years of weather, and the hallway smelled like dust trapped in carpet that had never been replaced. The stairwell lights flickered every few seconds. I tried to ignore it. I walked up to the second floor and knocked on the door the woman had told me about. A thin man in his 50s opened it halfway. His eyes looked like they were always waiting for something bad to happen. He stared at me for a long second before opening the door, just a little wider. He said something about me being earlier than the others. That was the moment a small knot formed in my stomach, because I hadn't heard anything about others. I told myself maybe he mixed me up with someone else. Maybe he was just confused. Maybe there were other people looking at the apartment too. I didn't ask for an explanation. I just stood there and waited for him to hand over the keys. Instead of handing them over, he stepped aside and motioned for me to come in. The air inside the apartment felt stale, like a place that had been closed for months. But at the same time, there was a faint smell that reminded me of someone staying there recently, like body heat trapped in fabric. The living room was basically empty. No couch, no table, no decorations, no signs of a woman living there or even packing up to travel. The only things in the room were a full-size mattress pushed against a wall, several half-full water bottles placed in rows near the corner, and a small black camera mounted high near the ceiling. It was tilted slightly downward, pointed at the center of the room. The lens was dusty, but the plastic casing looked new. I asked what it was for without really expecting an answer. He said it wasn't hooked up yet. He said it slowly, in a way that made the word yet feel like something he was waiting for. I kept looking around because I didn't know what else to do. The kitchen was empty, not even a sponge by the sink, just a sticky line where something had been spilled long ago and never cleaned. The cabinets smelled like old wood. There were no dishes, and no utensils, no trash bags, nothing that would show someone lived there. I walked to the bedroom, expecting at least a bed frame or a closet with luggage inside. The closet door was already slightly open, so I pushed it all the way. Inside were men's clothes, dress shirts, jeans, jackets, all in different sizes, like they didn't belong to one person. There wasn't a single women's item. No dresses, no sweaters, no cosmetic bags. The hangers were mismatched and spaced strangely, almost like someone had arranged them for display rather than actual everyday use. The smell inside the closet was strong, a mix of detergent and sweat that felt recent. The bathroom felt wrong in a different way. The mirror had streaks running down it like it had been wiped quickly with a wet towel. A toothbrush sat on the edge of the sink, and when I touched it by instinct, the bristles were damp. The shower curtain was pulled halfway open, revealing a drain that had a few strands of hair still clinging to it. A damp towel was bunched behind the door. None of it felt abandoned or prepared for a sublet. It felt like someone had used the bathroom less than an hour before I arrived. That was the moment my chest tightened. Something was not right. I walked back into the hallway and told the neighbor that the place wasn't what I expected. I didn't want to explain anything. I just wanted to leave. He stepped out of the apartment with me, too close, like he didn't want me to get away. He kept trying to get my attention, pointing down the stairwell as if he wanted to show me something else. He mentioned a basement storage area in a low, quiet voice. I didn't want to see anything else. I just kept walking toward the stairs. He followed a few steps behind, and I could hear his breathing getting heavier. It echoed off the walls in the stairwell. I didn't look back. I walked down to the front door and out of the building as calmly as I could manage. I didn't let myself hurry until I reached the sidewalk. When I finally turned around, he was standing inside the front door, watching me through the glass, his face blank. I drove home and tried to shake off the feeling. I told myself maybe the woman was real. Maybe she really was traveling and the neighbor was just awkward, and the apartment was just in transition. I tried to sleep with that idea, but my brain kept returning to the camera in the corner, the damp toothbrush, the men's clothes, and the word yet. It didn't add up. None of it did. Later that night, I heard the email notification on my phone. It was from the woman who listed the apartment. She asked why I hadn't stayed for the full walkthrough. She claimed her neighbor said I rushed out. The wording felt strange, almost like she was annoyed that I had left. Something about the tone made me uneasy. The picture on her email profile caught my eye. It looked too perfect, like a photo taken from a brochure or a catalog. I reverse searched it out of curiosity, not expecting much. It took about 10 seconds for the results to load. The same photo popped up on a dentist website from another state, a page advertising cleaning packages. The woman in the listing didn't exist. Or at least, the person emailing me wasn't her. That was the moment everything clicked into place. Someone was pretending to be a woman renting out a unit. Someone who didn't want to meet. Someone who used a neighbor to do all the in-person interactions. Someone who kept a camera pointed at the room. Someone who had no issue leaving men's clothes in the closet and a toothbrush still wet in the bathroom. Someone who was expecting others. I sat there with the email open and felt a slow, unsteady wave of dread sink through me. If I had been late instead of early, would there have been someone else inside the apartment? If I had stayed for the full walk-through, would the neighbor have closed the door behind me? If I had followed him to the basement, would anyone have known where I went? I didn't answer the email. I blocked the address. I deleted the Craigslist conversation. The ad disappeared the next day, when I checked the building from Street View weeks later. The windows of that apartment were covered with sheets from the inside, like someone didn't want people looking in. I still think about the neighbor's first words, the way he said I was earlier than the others. I think about how calm he seemed, how rehearsed everything felt, how the apartment was staged but not lived in. I think about who the others were supposed to be, and what was supposed to happen to them. The ending for me was simple. I walked away before I became whatever they were preparing for. I didn't get answers. I didn't need them. The only thing I needed was to never go back to that building, never reply to that fake woman, and never ignore my instincts again. In early 2023, I was having one of those months where everything felt like it was sliding out from under me. My hours at work had been cut again. My bank account was dipping lower than I liked, and I was taking any side job I could find just to keep up with rent. I had this habit of scrolling through Craigslist late at night, even the sketchier sections, because every now and then something decent showed up. That was when I saw the ad. It was short and written in a way that made me pause. It said something like, "Wife, quick, 100 for simple pickup delivery, no questions." That last part should have made me close the page, but the promise of quick money got under my skin. I remember staring at it longer than I should have, thinking how badly I needed the cash, how easy it probably would be, and how I could walk away from it right after. I told myself it wasn't the worst thing someone had posted on there and replied. He answered fast. He didn't use a name, didn't try to make small talk, didn't explain anything. All he said was to meet at a strip of warehouses on the east side at 40:30 p.m. I knew the area. It was one of those places where everything was metal siding, faded signs, loading docks, and cracked pavement. A place that got quiet real early in the day. I thought it was strange he picked that time instead of something earlier, when more people were around, but I pushed that thought out of my head. I told myself it would be fine, that he'd probably be waiting right outside, hand something off to me, and I'd just drive to whatever house he wanted and drop it off. Easy money. That was the lie I kept repeating. The day of the meeting. The sky was one of those gray winter skies that makes everything feel colder than it actually is. I got there a few minutes early and parked near the row of storage units and small workshops. There weren't many cars around. A few were parked crooked along the fence, probably belonging to people who worked inside, but most of the place looked like it was shutting down for the day. I sat in my car for a minute, watching the shadows stretch across the ground as the sun dipped behind the buildings. I kept checking my phone to make sure I was in the right spot. He hadn't sent a picture or description of himself, which I realized only then was another red flag. He showed up suddenly. I saw him walking toward my car from behind one of the warehouse corners. He looked like someone who didn't want attention. Plain clothes, hands shoved in his pockets, head tilted down just a bit. He didn't greet me or even ask if I was the person he was waiting for. He just walked straight up to me and held out a small padded envelope. It wasn't heavy, maybe the size of a paperback book. The seal on it was clean and smooth, like it had never been opened. He didn't explain anything, didn't give any warnings or details. He simply said I needed to deliver it to an address in Gresham. Then he did something that stuck with me. He told me to read the address out loud, to make sure I had it right. The tone he used wasn't casual. It sounded like he wanted to hear something specific in the way I said it. I looked at the envelope, expecting to see the street name he'd texted me earlier. Instead, it was completely different. Different house number, different street, different part of Gresham. It wasn't like he mixed up one number or spelled something wrong. It was a whole other destination. I felt something shift inside me, like a small click of warning. I didn't show it on my face. I acted like everything was normal, like I didn't notice a thing. My voice stayed even. I read the address exactly as he wanted. I nodded and told him I'd drive there right away. He didn't move when I turned away. I felt him behind me as I walked to my car. His steps were close, too close for comfort. Not brushing against me or touching me, but close enough that I could feel the pressure of his presence on my back. I didn't want to run or rush, because I didn't know how he'd react if I made it obvious that something felt wrong. When I reached my car, I opened the door fast, got in, locked it, and started the engine all in one motion. I didn't even bother with my seat belt at first. I pulled out before he could say anything else, and when I glanced in the mirror, he was still standing there in the same spot, watching me drive away. He didn't wave or nod. He just stared. I didn't drive to the address he gave me. I drove straight out of the warehouse lane, across two intersections, and into the back parking lot of a grocery store that had big blue recycling bins lined up against a brick wall. I parked behind them, out of sight from most angles, and sat there for a moment with the engine running. My hands were sweating even though the air inside the car was cold. I didn't want to open the envelope. I didn't want to know what was inside. I didn't want anything that belonged to that man to stay with me. I tossed it into one of the bins without looking twice. It landed with a hollow thud, like it hit something soft inside. I didn't care. I pulled out of the lot and drove straight home. For a while, everything felt quiet. I tried to pretend the whole thing was over. I made dinner, took a shower, and sat on my bed trying to act like my nerves weren't still buzzing. It wasn't until later, when the outside light had faded and the apartment felt too still, that my phone buzzed. The number wasn't saved, but I didn't need it to be. I knew exactly who it was. He asked why I didn't deliver it. He said he knew I kept it, and told me to come back before he reported me. I stared at the message for a long time, reading it over and over, trying to figure out what he meant by report. Report me to who? The police? Someone else? The words didn't sound like something a normal person would say. They sounded like someone pretending to have control, someone trying to make me panic. But the part that got to me wasn't the threat. It was the confidence. He spoke like he was sure of what I did, like he'd been watching. I didn't text back. I didn't ask him anything. I blocked the number and did a factory reset on the phone. I didn't want any trace of our messages, his number, or the location saved anywhere. I didn't even want the same phone settings. I wiped everything clean. I sat on the edge of my bed while the phone reset itself, watching the screen go dark and light again, thinking how easily I could have gone to that address without questioning it. How easily I could have walked right into something worse. I didn't sleep well that night. Every small sound made me tense. I kept picturing him standing behind me in that quiet warehouse lot, following me those last few feet. I kept wondering if he had planned for me to notice the wrong address, or if he expected me not to think at all. I wondered what would have happened if I had gone to the place written on the envelope. Who would have been waiting? What I would have walked into. Nothing else happened after that night. No more texts. No one came to my door. No strange cars parked outside. But the whole experience stuck with me in a way I hadn't expected. It made me realize how fast you can get pulled into something dangerous without even meaning to. How desperation can make you ignore the signs sitting right in front of you. I never answered another quick gig ad again. I never met strangers in empty industrial areas. I never picked up anything for anyone who refused to explain what it was. It wasn't worth the money, not even close. I knew how lucky I was to get out with nothing more than a lingering sense of unease. And sometimes when I drive past that side of town, I think about that envelope sitting somewhere in a landfill, or burned up with other trash, and how that small choice, throwing it away, might have kept something worse from following me home. It was late September of 2018, and I was trying to clear out some old things I didn't need anymore. One of those things was an old iPhone 7 I had lying around. It wasn't in the best shape, but it still worked fine, and I figured someone might want it. I listed it on Craigslist, putting a clear picture of the phone and its condition, the usual short description, and my price. I got a few responses that afternoon, and one of them stood out to me immediately. The guy said he wanted to meet late at night, around 10 p.m., in the parking lot of a closed strip mall off Claremont Mesa Boulevard. He gave some excuse about checking the IMEI number in his car, because the streetlights created a glare, and he wanted to see it clearly. I felt a little uneasy, but I had met strangers on Craigslist before, and nothing had ever gone wrong. I thought I could handle it, so I agreed. That evening, I made sure I had the phone ready, and I drove toward the strip mall. The streets were mostly empty, and the glow from the nearby gas station was weak, barely reaching the parking lot I was aiming for. I arrived a few minutes early, parking near the edge so I could see if anyone else was around. The place was dead, like it always is at that hour. The windows of the stores were dark, and the only sound was the occasional hum of a distant car on Claremont Mesa Boulevard. I didn't notice him at first. He came up from the far end of the lot, dressed in dark clothing that blended with the shadows. He waved briefly and I walked over, keeping my phone in my pocket. As I got closer, something in the way he moved made me pause. He was jittery, scanning the lot like he didn't want anyone to see him. That's when I noticed the back seat of his car, partially hidden by the darkness. Two men were crouched low, and trying to stay out of view. My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't want to show that I'd seen them. It was instinct, a split-second decision to keep calm and not make the situation worse. I told him I had left the phone in my car and would grab it quickly. I turned and walked toward my car, trying to act casual. The lot felt suddenly huge and empty, but I could feel eyes on me. Every shadow seemed to stretch, every small sound amplified. I kept my steps steady, my hand brushing the keys in my pocket. I reached my car and unlocked it. Just as I was about to get in, I heard a door open behind me. Not the sound of a car door slamming or anyone moving quickly. This was slow, deliberate, almost silent. My stomach dropped. I slid into the driver's seat as quietly as I could and locked all the doors. My hands were shaking, gripping the steering wheel, and I started the engine. The headlights cut through the dark lot, but even with them on, the other car didn't move. That's when the guy came up to my window. His movements were fast now, almost aggressive, and he tapped on the glass. I could see his face in the reflection, angry like I had insulted him somehow. I ignored him and kept my foot on the brake. My mind was racing. But every Craigslist story I'd ever read about someone being robbed or worse ran through my head. But I forced myself to stay calm. I didn't want to give him any reason to escalate. Then I drove off, slowly at first, making sure he didn't try to follow me. My pulse was racing, my chest tight. The street was empty, and I took a few turns to get out of the area. I didn't want to risk heading straight home just yet, not with three guys clearly up to something in a dark parking lot. I eventually found myself circling around a well-lit gas station. I parked there, left the engine running, and tried to collect my thoughts. My hands were trembling, and I kept checking my rearview mirror, expecting to see them coming after me. I stayed like that for nearly 15 minutes before finally feeling it was safe enough to drive home. Once I was home, I parked in my garage and sat in the car for a while, breathing deeply. I checked my phone and saw a text from him. We could have worked it out. Don't be dramatic. My hands shook as I read it. The tone was casual, almost like he wasn't threatening me. But I knew better. The fact that he had three men in the back seat, hiding and waiting, made it very clear what his intentions were. I didn't respond. I deleted the message immediately and put the phone in a drawer. For the next 2 weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about that night. I replayed it over and over, analyzing every decision I had made, every step I had taken. The way they had moved, the way they had hidden, it all felt like something out of a movie, but it had happened to me. I realized how lucky I was that I had trusted my instincts and walked away from the phone. I also realized that Craigslist, while convenient, had a side that was unpredictable and dangerous. Eventually, I decided I still needed to sell the phone. I wasn't going to keep it just to let the memory linger. But this time, I was careful. I found a buyer who agreed to meet in the lobby of a local police station. It was broad daylight, mid-afternoon, and the area was constantly monitored. I brought the phone and waited inside the lobby, where there were cameras and officers walking by every few minutes. When the buyer arrived, everything went smoothly. He handed me cash. I handed over the phone, and that was it. No tricks, no hidden people, no adrenaline spike that made me feel like my heart was going to explode. After that, I stopped using Craigslist for anything other than small, low-risk items I could exchange in public spaces with security cameras or heavy foot traffic. That night off Claremont Mesa Boulevard had stayed with me for a long time, A reminder that not everyone's intentions online are what they seem. Even when people act casual, even when the text seems polite, the reality can be very different. I learned to trust my instincts, to be cautious, and to never meet someone in a dark, empty place late at night again. Looking back now, I realize how easily it could have gone wrong. Just one wrong move, one hesitation, and I might have been in real danger. The fear I felt that night stayed with me for months, but it also taught me a valuable lesson: safety comes first, no matter how small the risk might seem. Meeting in a police station, surrounded by cameras and people, was not only practical but necessary. The final sale was quick and uneventful, and for the first time in weeks, I felt that sense of relief that comes from being truly safe. The phone was gone, and the fear had passed, and I had a clear understanding of just how careful I needed to be when dealing with strangers online. That experience never left me completely. Even years later, if I see a Craigslist post late at night, I think about those two men hiding in the back seat, waiting, ready for something that could have been terrible. It made me respect caution in a way I never had before. It also made me appreciate the little things: lights in a parking lot, the presence of other people, even something as small as a secure public place to complete a sale. That one night could have changed everything, but it didn't. And I made sure that moving forward, nothing like that would ever catch me off guard again. The lesson was clear, the memory vivid, and the choice simple: never take unnecessary risks with strangers, and always, always trust your instincts. By the time the phone was sold in the police station lobby, I felt closure. The adrenaline that had gripped me months before was gone, replaced by a calm sense of control. I knew I had done the right thing. I had made the smart choice, and I had escaped something dangerous by trusting myself. It was a relief I didn't take lightly. A lesson in vigilance and caution that would stay with me for the rest of my life. I never wanted to feel that kind of fear again, and I made sure that I never would. Meeting strangers online, even for something as simple as selling an old phone, had a hidden danger I had underestimated until that night. But I came out of it wiser, safer, and more aware. And when I think back, I know that small decision to get back into my car and drive off, to not confront them, to trust my instincts, was what saved me. The rest of the world could wait. That night had taught me that safety is not optional. It is everything. The memory of that parking lot, the dark, the hidden faces in the back seat, and the tap on my window stayed with me for a long time, a silent warning. But the way I handled it, the care I took afterward, and finally selling the phone in a safe, controlled environment turned a terrifying experience into a lesson I would carry forever. And after that, I never felt the need to take risks like that again. I had learned how fragile safety can be, how quickly a situation can turn, and how important it is to respect that fragility. The phone was gone, but the lesson remained, crystal clear, unforgettable, and entirely real. I needed a crate for the rescue dog I was fostering, and Craigslist had a free one listed only 2 blocks from my apartment. It was early November, a wet, cold night around 7. The kind of night where the rain isn't heavy enough to see, but you feel it on your face and in your clothes. I had been putting off getting a crate for days, and when I saw the listing pop up, free, good condition, pick up tonight only, I figured it was perfect timing. I didn't want to wait for shipping or spend money I didn't really have. 2 blocks was nothing. I could walk it. I put on a thin rain jacket that wasn't doing its job anymore, grabbed a small flashlight, and started down the sidewalk. The streetlights in my neighborhood always seemed dim, but that night they felt weaker than usual. The rain made everything shine in a way that made it impossible to tell what was a shadow and what was just wet pavement. The neighborhood itself was quiet. No kids outside, no cars passing, no one walking a dog, just the sound of the drizzle and my own footsteps. The house was easy to find. A dark single-story place with an empty driveway and a sagging fence. When I stepped closer, I noticed there wasn't a single light on inside. not even a glow from a TV or phone. The listing had said to go around back, because the crate wouldn't fit through the house. I had assumed that meant the seller would meet me there, but when I saw the gate slightly open, swinging a little in the wind, I realized I might be alone. I hesitated at the gate for a second. I didn't hear any movement, but the yard felt too quiet. I pushed the gate with my foot, and it creaked louder than I expected. I stepped in, closed it behind me out of habit, and walked toward the backyard. My shoes sunk slightly into the wet soil. The smell of damp leaves and old wood hung in the air. There were no lights back there either, and just darkness and the faint outline of a shed on the right. I called out the seller's name, expecting an answer, but all I heard was something shift behind the shed. Not a clear sound, just a dull scrape like something heavy being dragged or a foot sliding in mud. I froze for a moment. I wanted to think it was an animal, maybe a raccoon knocking something over. But raccoons don't usually sound like that. It felt like a person trying not to be heard. I lifted my phone and turned on the flashlight. It cut through a small cone of the darkness, enough for me to see the crate halfway between the shed and the back door. At first glance, it looked normal, metal bars slightly worn, about the size I needed. But as I walked closer, the details came into focus, and none of it made sense. The crate had fresh scratches on the inside, not little accidental ones. Long, desperate marks like something had clawed or scraped against the metal with force. Near the front corner was a thick rope tied to one of the bars, knotted tight in a way that didn't look like something used for holding a door shut. It looked like something used to restrain something, or someone. I stared at it longer than I should have, trying to come up with a simple explanation. Maybe the guy had a large, anxious dog. Maybe the rope was for securing the crate during travel. But the knot was the kind used for keeping tension, and not stability, and the scratches were too fresh, too uneven, almost frantic. I turned in a slow circle, shining my phone around the yard. That was when I saw the tire tracks behind me. Deep, wet impressions where someone had backed in from the alley. They were fresh enough that the rain hadn't filled them in. My stomach tightened. If this guy wasn't home, one who had driven in so recently, or did he actually live here? The listing hadn't mentioned anything about meeting him inside, but the house had looked completely empty. Then I saw the shoe prints. Not walking tracks. Not pacing. Just repeated imprints of someone standing near the crate. Dozens of them, all in the same small area, like someone had been waiting there for a long time. The ground was soft enough that they stood out clearly. One pair of prints, the same size over and over. A person standing still, maybe facing the gate, maybe listening. The air suddenly felt colder. My hands started shaking, partly from the cold but mostly from something deeper. Something instinctive. I didn't want to be standing in that yard anymore. I didn't want to keep looking at the crate or wonder if the sound behind the shed was the same person who had made those prints. I didn't run. Running would make noise, and noise didn't feel safe. I backed away slowly, keeping my phone up to watch the space around me. My breathing felt too loud, even though I was barely breathing at all. Each step felt like it took a full minute. I didn't turn my back on the crate until I was close to the gate, and even then I did it as slowly as possible. I slipped through the gate, didn't bother closing it, and walked down the sidewalk with stiff, controlled steps until I was out of sight of the house. Only then did I let myself move faster. When I got back to my apartment, I locked the door twice and stood in the living room listening for anything outside. My clothes were damp, my hands cold, and my mind kept replaying the way those shoe prints were sunk into the mud. They weren't spaced apart like someone pacing or walking. They were pressed down again and again in the same spots. A person standing and waiting. I set my phone on the counter and tried to convince myself that I had overreacted. Maybe the whole situation had a simple explanation. Maybe the seller had strange habits. Maybe he worked nights. Maybe he walked in circles when thinking and left odd prints. Maybe the sound behind the shed was an animal like I first hoped. Maybe the crate had the rope for some normal reason I hadn't considered. I wanted to believe all of that, until the email notification popped up. It was from the seller, sent only a few minutes after I left his yard. His message was short, just a few words. No greeting, nothing polite. A flat statement: you were supposed to wait. I was almost there. There was no way he knew I had been there, unless he had actually been watching or arrived just after I left. And if he had gotten home that fast, he should have seen me walking down the sidewalk. But he didn't mention that. He didn't ask if I found the crate. He didn't explain the rope or the scratches, or the complete darkness of the house. The message didn't feel like someone annoyed. It felt like someone who was angry that his plan didn't go the way he expected. I didn't reply. I didn't open the listing again. I blocked the email immediately, my hands shaking again. I shut all my blinds and kept the lights off for the rest of the night. I kept replaying the timeline in my head, trying to figure out how close he had been. If he had been the shifting sound behind the shed. If he had been standing in those footprints earlier, waiting for someone to walk into that yard. Maybe not for a dog crate. Maybe not for anything normal. The rescue dog slept at my feet that night, not knowing why I kept checking the peephole every few minutes. I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about the rope, the scratches, the silent yard, the tire tracks, the prints in the mud, and the message saying he had almost arrived. He had expected me to wait. He had expected me to stay in that dark yard, near that crate, long enough for him to come back. I don't know what he wanted, and I don't want to know. But I know I wasn't supposed to leave as quickly as I did. And I know I walked away from something that felt wrong in a way that gets under your skin only after you have time to think about it. The next morning, the listing was gone. The email bounce back said the account had been deleted. I walked by that house once in daylight from across the street, pretending I was just out for a normal walk. The house looked just as empty in daylight as it had at night. No cars, no movement, no sign that anyone lived there at all. I never went near it again. And I never used Craigslist for free items after that night.